Good evening, everyone. My name is Janet Eagleson. I am the Manager of Public Affairs and External Relations at the town of Caledon. Thank you so much for coming to our third of 4 public information sessions on the rezoning bylaws. It's great to be in Alton. The Legion's a fantastic place, and it's so good to see many of the same faces we've seen at other events and many new ones as well. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. Indigenous peoples have unique and enduring relationships with the land. Indigenous peoples have lived on and cared for this land throughout the ages. We acknowledge this, and we recognize the significance of the land on which we gather and call home. We acknowledge the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee peoples and the Anishinaabeg of the Williams Treaties. This land is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We honor and respect Indigenous heritage and the long-lasting history of the land and strive to protect the land, water, plants, and animals that have inhabited this land for the generations yet to come. So I'm going to start by asking the members of council to just wave so we know where they are. I'm not going to take the time to introduce everyone. A few of them here today. We have everybody sitting or generally sitting apart, so there's no sense that they could have a discussion as a full group and have quorum, and that would turn the meeting into another type of meeting. So that's why everyone's sort of in different spots in the room. If I could get the senior staff to also wave. There's a few people around the room. Thank you. So I'm going to start for those people who were at our public meeting in April. There were a lot of shortcomings in that meeting. We heard you. In that meeting, we missed the mark. It's about the only way I can say it. We had consultants speak on our behalf. We didn't have staff speak. We didn't give enough information. Some of the information that came out at midnight when it should have come out at the beginning of the session or early on. Lots of people went home. The people who endured heard it, but not everyone did. So that's why the format of these meetings is different. This is not a regulatory meeting. This is an information session. We're going to go through the slides. At the end, we'll have opportunity to be able to take questions. If some of you provided questions on the cards, we'll take those first, and then we'll move to questions at the mic stand in the middle, and our technical experts will be able to respond to the questions that you have. We've also heard feedback from the previous sessions. So we've made changes between session 1 and session 2. We cut out about close to 40% of the slides. For people at the second one, that wasn't good enough, and I get it. I'll tell you, just so that you know, I have not taken out slides between 2 and 3. What I have done is I am going to restrict the mayor to 5 minutes. I have my phone right there and a timer set up. I'm going to give her warning after 3 minutes, and then I won't forcibly remove her off the stage, but then we can get to the content, the technical pieces, and then we can get to questions that much further and sooner. This is not a statutory meeting, as I said. So when you get to the mic stand, or if you're going to provide them on the cue cards, you may do so anonymously. You don't have to put your name to it. Your question, a question is a good question, because if you have it, probably somebody else does too. When you get to the mic stand, please try to focus your energy into the question so that many people can get to the mic stand rather than spending time stating a position and then backing up the line. So we want to be able to process those questions. And the other part is I will do a better job than I did the last session in pointing to who is the right person to answer the question. So marrying up the question to the right technical expert to get the answer or get the close to an answer for you as quickly as possible. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mayor Groves. I got to get my timer, though.
Thank you, Janet, and good evening, everyone. And Janet won't need to use her timer because I'm not going to stand in the way of you and your questions and the information that needs to be presented. Thank you for coming out this evening and for attending this information session at the April 25th meeting. We heard loud and clear that you wanted more information about what it is that we are proposing. Just a quick overview so that you have some content, and Janet and staff will get into the details. I won't get into the details. In April of 2022, the Region Appeal did an urban boundary expansion. That urban boundary expansion included 11,000 acres of land. Within those 11,000 acres of land, those lands were designated for both residential and industrial development. The 11,000 acres of land is to take us to a population of 300,000, so it's an additional 220,000 that's been assigned to us by the province of Ontario. That takes us to 2051. Most of that, or all of that, population growth would be south of King Street. So it would be in the south end of Caledon. It will not be in the north end of Caledon. In November 2022, the province approved the region's official plan of the 11,000 acres with some modification. And also on March 26th of this year, the Town of Caledon Council, we approved and adopted our official plan. That official plan is now at the region for approval. Not sure when that's going to be approved, but it is there for approval. During that time, I believe it was in 2022 and 2023, Council approved what we called a growth management phasing plan. That was consultants that we hired. It was Watson and Associate and Mr. Nick McDonald from Meridian. These are people that have been working and doing work for the Town of Caledon for many, many years. Watson and Associate, they do all of our development charges background study, and they've been doing this for years. And Nick McDonald from Meridian, he did what we called our Bolton residential expansion study. So quite familiar with what's been happening in Town of Caledon with respect to growth, with respect to development. These 12 sites that I brought forward, was not something that I picked out of thin air or I colored it on the map. These are the recommendations out of that growth management phasing plan. And those are the sites that the growth management phasing plan recommended in phase 1. From there, we did add, I believe, 3 or 4 more sites to that from phase 2. Okay, got 2 minutes, but with that, that's a quick overview of where we are, why we are here today, and really it's about getting ahead of development. We don't want development driving us, we need to drive development. And we have been reacting to development for many, many years because we go to the tribunal approves development, and we get development that we really don't want. We don't get the community benefits with that, so we have taken a more proactive approach. And with that, I know Janet is signaling, so I'm going to get off the stage so that the meeting can carry on and the information can be presented and you can have an opportunity to ask your questions. Thank you.
Just to be official, there's still 1 minute and 13 left, but I'm not going to let her back up. No offense. So we're going to start with the why now, and what about the housing pledge? I'm going to talk about 5 pieces. Caledon's housing pledge is a great start, but it's not enough. Adversarial decision-making must end. Servicing and transit needs to be planned at scale, not in bits. Secondary plans are community builders, especially at scale. And strong mayor powers, like 'em or hate 'em, create competition between municipalities for the same developers, the same tradespeople, and the same infrastructure incentives. Next slide. So Caledon's housing pledge has not changed. That's 13,000 homes, new homes, by 2031. So it was an 8-year period when the housing pledge was started, and nothing has changed. Our targets, as you see them here on the screen, we got 778 in 2023. That's 82%. And if anyone was following along in the local paper or online, you saw that the town got a check from the provincial government as an incentive for meeting the target. The reality is that by 2051, Caledon has to grow by 220,000 people. That's about 67,000 new homes. That's 27 years away. So at the rate that we're going right now, it's going to take us a minimum of 35 years to get there, and we have 27. The harsher reality of that, and it's something that I didn't mention in Bolton, is that with Bill 185 and the provincial planning statement that's being ratified right now and will be passed, is likely to accelerate. Why? Because up till now, there's been forecasting that has been done by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. The province is changing how they're going to do growth forecasting. They're going to use the Ministry of Finance numbers. It sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but the point of that piece is that the Ministry of Finance integrates immigration with housing starts. Their forecasts are really aggressive. So while we don't have a crystal ball, we do expect that the 2051 number, the 220,000, will probably grow. It's not, like I said, it's not set in stone, and we do not have a crystal ball, but it is an uncomfortable reality of needing to be able to get moving and get going faster. Next slide. Development doesn't happen overnight. From the time the paperwork is in and you actually get shovels in ground, it might be 10 or 11 years. If it's in a building, an apartment building or a condominium, probably another 2 to 3 years. That's a long way away. So the illustration that you see here on the side is a little bit like a funnel. You plan for as many homes and a larger number as possible. The number that is approved is smaller. The number that actually gets built is smaller still. Many municipalities have high numbers of units that just don't get started. We've experienced that in Caledon. We hit 82%, but we need to hit that and more in order to be able to go forward. Next. Now, BREZ. For anybody in the room who's familiar with BREZ, what a hot mess. So that was a made in Caledon solution that went forward, gosh, I don't even remember the year. Regional Council got a hold of it and decided, well, we don't really like what the town has come up with. And typically in municipal planning, the local municipality sets out the targets, sets out the plan, and at the upper tier, it's approved. So Regional Council got involved and said, we don't like it. They had regional staff redo the technical pieces. A provincial facilitator was brought in order to try to mediate. If anybody was here, I was working at the region at the time, and I still remember the day that every member of Caledon Council got up and walked out to break quorum in part of that process. It was a pretty incredible moment, to be honest. In the process, landowners got pitted against landowners. Developers got pitted against municipalities and landowners. There were more than a dozen appeals to the Ontario Land Tribunal. The net result, there wasn't a single house started. It cost the town over $5 million. All parties at the time spent about $30 million total. So another $25 million from landowners, developers, and interested party. That's a lot of money to get nowhere. And Brampton, I lived in Brampton. I'm not going to badmouth Brampton, but Brampton was ready, and Brampton got the infrastructure. They got the transit, and they got all the pieces because they said they're fighting or they're arguing, and there's a distraction, and we need to grow, so we are going to line up. Next slide. So Caledon has long used comprehensive planning, but our planning team has never really been able to get that rolling on large scale because of the piecemeal nature of the way BREZ came together. So it's had to be opportunistic. The official plan that was passed a few weeks ago at Council lays out our long-term plan for urban growth and density, and all 12 of the parcels that you're going to learn about today that are on the boards at the back are within the growth plan. So for those of you who know planning, and there are many people in the room who do, comprehensive planning looks at bigger geographies, their interconnectedness, systems for transportation, for utilities, for the infrastructure, for walkability, livability, and it focuses on having a few more long-term gains than short-term wins. Next slide. So the train. So Metrolink says we can have a train, but then they said probably not till 2041, maybe later. Transit can't be planned in pieces in the way that it is. So we've got a new bus route that's coming up from Brampton into Bolton, which was a month ago that was launched, but we can't get transit in any way large scale until we have population. The rezoning affords us to help lead the way with our utility plans, with the region appeal for water and wastewater, and with Metrolinks, because they keep punting. So they move forward and don't help plan a larger system for us if we don't have the larger plan. The rezoning of these 12 parcels helps to contribute towards that. Now, secondary plans. We've heard lots and lots about secondary plans. Why aren't secondary plans first? Why don't you do it the old way, or the traditional way, or the proper way? So for those of you who don't know what a secondary plan is, that lays out what the community is going to look like. It brings together environmental protection, natural heritage, all of the systems. It involves public meetings, input from the community to help decide how the community is going to look and how it's going to grow. So yes, in conventional zoning, that comes after a secondary plan. With the rezoning though, and it speaks to what I just spoke to earlier, the need to have those larger scale utility, waste and water plans, as well as transit plans, the idea of being able to bring forward rezoning on a larger scale sooner helps us to get to the planning tables. Those plans typically work in about 10-year increments. The sooner that all of our partners can start those plans, the better it is for us to be able to move forward and be able to actually get some shovels in the ground and homes in the next 10 to 15 years. Now, strong mayor powers. So, it is a bit of an elephant in the room. Heard lots and lots. A lot of people don't like it. So, I'm going to run down the list that you see at the very top here. The whole list is actually what strong mayor powers are, what they allow us, or what they allow the mayor to do. They don't allow for everything, so it is a restricted list. One of the points that was really important that I failed to mention the last time, what happens with strong mayor power is that something can be passed with a 1/3 vote, as opposed to a 2/3 vote. So it's now entrenched in the Municipal Act, and I think I saw Al. Is Al here? Al had a really valid question at the end that we really blew the answer on. And so what Al asked is, does strong mayor power disappear after 2031? Because that's where the housing incentive, our target is. So did a little bit of digging today and looked into what the legislation actually says. So strong mayor powers is now entrenched in the Municipal Act. So what it is tied to is it allows for things where a bylaw could advance a prescribed provincial priorities. So the province has left that wide open. So I'm going to repeat that. So the strong mayor powers in this context can be used where a bylaw could advance a prescribed provincial priorities. So what's a priority to this province? You may snicker, you may do whatever, because I know that everybody thinks that beer and liquor in the variety stores is probably a bigger priority right now. There is actually a list of what a provincial priority is. So it is the advancing of 1.5 million new home starts by 2031. It is also used the provincial priorities are for the construction and maintenance of infrastructure to support housing specific to transit, roads, utilities, and servicing to support housing. So by taking strong mayor powers, we had to set the pledge. With the pledge comes incentives. The incentive that we saw the town get a couple months ago is the type of incentive that we can use to put forward into program to help ensure that our tax levy, or the taxes that you pay, don't climb exponentially through any of these pieces of work. If you could just flip to the next slide. So how does it help us compete by using strong mayor powers? So 46 municipalities were granted this power. 4 turned it down, but 46 municipalities took it. The data that you see on this slide is available through open data online. If you want to go search for it, you can actually search and find every single instance that strong mayor power has been used in every municipality that accepted it. So the reality of the 46 is that we're all competing for the same developers, the same tradespeople, the same infrastructure funding, and you've also heard in the last couple of weeks in the media that there's developers not building, that the houses are not full, the ones that are already built, that the condos sit empty in Toronto. So that's a now issue for sure. With this work, we are looking at a 10 to 12 to 15-year period. What we want to do in terms of the rezoning is be at the front of the line. Not an Amex thing. I'm not going to steal their line. It's a copyright anyways. When we get to the place where developers say, I'm going to start, we want to be there and demonstrating that we are the community that they can start in first. When I spoke about adversarial decision making, I don't know who wants to partner with us if they've invested over $25 million and gotten nothing out of it. So there is a bit of a reality that for anyone who believes that anyone has a developer in their pocket or a developer has anyone in their pocket, I can't imagine why. Too much money has been spent. And you may have a different opinion, but that's a reality. Money talks in that particular case. 43 of 46 communities who have strong mayor powers have actually used it. And as of the 7th of March, 637 decisions had been issued using these powers. That number has increased. Rezoning has already been done 3 times in order to be able to buy a strong mayor power. I have the names of the places, and I'll give you a description of what those are. Ajax did a rezoning, and they rezoned a piece of land to create 2 60-story towers that have a total of 1,274 rental units. The folks in Mississauga did it. You may remember that the council said no to 4plexes, and the previous mayor, the outgoing mayor, returned and said, yes, we do. So it overturned a 4plex decision, and they moved that forward. The other one is in Belleville. And so a lot of the specifics of the actual names of the rezoning classes is beyond me, but I'll read to you what it is and how the rezoning worked. So they rezoned from highway residential 4th density and open space to highway commercial zone with special provisions. So those are the instances where rezoning has occurred under strong mayor. We also had a question about, is this just another MZO? Caledon has had its share of MZOs. So the thing I think for me when I looked at this chart, in the middle column under MZO, there's a whole lot of not subject to, no notice or consultation, may not be subject to, or not subject to. That's a lot of no consultation and no connectivity. On the strong mayor side, that's on the right-hand side, the contrast to that, in each of those same categories, subject to appeal rules, subject to requirements under the Planning Act, must comply with applicable policy documents, and must comply with the provisions of the Planning Act. Next slide. So one of the other things that came out partway through the meeting, and it took one of our counselors going over and getting part of the list and spelling it out, so thank you for doing that, is the name of the developers. And the piece, I think that there's a lot of names on here that some folks will recognize. You may have a very visceral reaction to them. The first piece is, this is a town-led exercise. It's not a developer-led exercise. The names that you see on the left-hand side are developers who already have their planning applications in and underway. The ones on the right-hand side are developers who've already had the conversation with respect to the parcel of land that we're talking about, and they've had those conversations to start with our planning team. They are in the process of or just about to submit the proper applications to that. For anyone who's taking pictures, you can get the information off the website as well to save you your camera and the Zoom. So there's three key pieces on here. All of them are in the urban boundary area that the mayor mentioned earlier, or inside a settlement area that was already part of the official plan. It was raised to us that one of the maps was wrong, and it was. One of the layers that put on the 413 on one of the maps in the process was wrong. We used the layer that was the full hold that the province asked us to hold for the 413 that was there from the beginning. They have already moved to the 50% line. So that means that they're 50% essentially on the way to choosing the location. So we put the wrong layer on. We used the original one when we should have used the 50% one. I mentioned it in Bolton. One of the other things that has happened is this is not uncommon. When the Greenbelt was laid out, best intentions, the first pass at the map put it through people's barns, it put it through people's houses. There wasn't any ill intent with that. It was just the wrong line and the wrong layer that was picked, and it was corrected through the process so that everyone got what they needed. That's how the inputs were integrated and the comments were built in to make sure that there wasn't something nefarious going on. Now, the other piece of this is pretty important. The developer isn't always a landowner. They're often different. Typically, they're different. Now, A6 is a different one, and thank you to Al for bringing this question up between session 1 and session 2, because A6 says Bolton North Landowners Group. And Al was great to email to me and say, hey, what's going on? There's a big Argo sign out in that. So what is it? Argo is one of the owners. They happen to put a big sign up on the piece of property in the same way that you or I might put up a sign on our own property to say who owned it. I don't have that kind of money to put that kind of sign on, nor do I want people to know that much about where I live. But that's sort of the reality. These pieces of land have anywhere from one landowner to 67. There are 260 separate landowners that are part of this particular, the 12 parcels. All of those landowners can be accessed through the Land Registry Office, Service Ontario. We all know how painful that is to go through Service Ontario, unless you've had a better experience than I have. But that information is available if you are interested in looking at any one of the parcels or all to go and do that search. The next slide, please. Now, the letters from Minister Calandra and the Region of Peel. They were hot off the presses at the time of the April meeting. They caused a lot of controversy, and I appreciate Nicola Ross. Is Nicola here tonight by any chance? No? So Nicola clarified what the actual question was because I got this wrong between the first one and the second one. So with clarity from Nicola, specifically it was why were they kept from council, and why, if they say share at a public meeting or make available at a public meeting, weren't they? So their comments. So when we do any type of planning bylaw, we submit or send out information to all parties. It could be the Conservation Authority, it could be a municipality, it could be the landowners, it could be anyone. And could be the Ministry of Energy. We seek comments, they send them back to us. They go into planning looks at them, makes adjustments or refinements to the bylaws, and goes back and forth with those parties until we come to some sort of solution. We don't ignore them, but for anyone who is not a planning expert, they can look like they're inflammatory when they're in isolation. So we give them to planning because it's part of a natural process. On the next slide, I'm going to be able to share with you an actual comment that was made by the region. So we don't enter them into the public realm until such time that the final bylaws are finished and they come back to council for ratification. Would you flip the slide for me? So up here, and it's going to be hard to read from the back row probably. So, and no offense, I called this boring last meeting and they weren't totally offended by it, but this is a comments review matrix, response matrix. This is what our planning team takes every input, every comment that comes in, and they put it into a matrix that looks like this. They go back and forth, as I said, with the commenters until the thing is resolved. So I'm going to read out to you, in case you can't read, the left-hand column says region comments. This is taken directly from the letter from the region, and it is specific to area A1 to A9 and A11. The region's comment stated, the region advises that small areas in areas 4, 5, and 11 related to the proposed route of Highway 413 are identified as being outside the 2051 new urban area boundary. So the town response, this is an excerpt of our response because I couldn't fit it all on here and make even remotely legible, so this is a portion of this. Alignment issues of the regional urban boundary with 1, the original Highway 413 preferred route, and 2, the new boundary from the 50% design prepared by MTO. The intent was to map and zone up to the most up-to-date planned ROW, or right-of-way, for the 413, with the holding provisions in place in all the bylaws that for land within the focused analysis area, clearance must be granted from the Ministry of Transportation with regards to the GTA West Corridor / Highway 413 alignment. Zoning bylaws for areas 4, A4, A5, and A11 have corrected the boundaries of the lands in the new urban area. So we do this for every comment that comes in, whether it comes from the Conservation Authority, the Region Appeal, it could be the Ministry of Energy, it could be the Ministry of Transportation, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and so on and so on. There are lots of them. The next column says, is comment addressed as part of the updated zoning bylaw? This says yes. So the team in the first week or so had already addressed about 95% of the comments that had come in from both the region and Minister Calandra. In some cases, we're still going back and forth on the refinements of those to make sure that they meet the requirements of each of those commenter. Late on Thursday, right before the meeting, we got an additional comment came in from the Ministry of Transportation. And so they advised us, it's not included in the chart because we didn't change the chart, but what it states is that the MTO advised the town that we can process development applications within the focused analysis area, or FAA, for the 413. And over time, they will refine it, that FAA, the focused analysis area, through public consultation and release lands that are not required for the 413. So how do we do that? When we take comments, we analyze them, and when the ministry says, okay, you need to do X, or the Conservation Authority says, well, we need Y. So that's a hold. So in planning language, that's a big H in the sections on the inside the zoning bylaws in any of the maps. The maps up here don't have the H's in it, but the amended bylaws will. They are standard planning tools that have been used, I can't say forever, but for a very long time, in order to be able to put and create provisions and holds for things like servicing, for transportation restrictions like the 413, for watershed concerns, and for any other concern that arises from the comments. So there are holds in all 12 of the bylaws that actually make sure that servicing is available before development can start. Those have to be removed by council in order to proceed. They have to meet the requirements of the commenter before we can actually take them out. So this isn't a speed ahead to make shovels in the ground. All of those provisions need to be accounted for. So I'll give you some examples of what kind of holds have been placed and were already in the bylaws but have been strengthened on behalf of the comments. So this particular one is related to the 413. Now, for anybody who wasn't aware, I don't want to break your heart too much, but the reality is there's going to be an energy corridor alongside the 413. And so there are restrictions both for the highway itself and this Northwest GTA transmission corridor and NAI. So in there, we have comments from both the Ministry of Transportation and the Ministry of Energy that give us very specific requirements that nothing can happen on those segments of those parcels until such time that they clear it and that we can move ahead. So they are actually in 6 of the zones or the parcels, A1, A2, A4, 5, 9, and 11. So we go back and forth. We do this because it's a collaborative process, because we need to satisfy the stakeholders' the needs. The word proposed in the last line is an important one. And that's because these bylaws are draft. They are not final. They have not come back to council. So until such time that council passes it and they go into effect, that's when the language changes and it will not say proposed anymore. It's just a reinforcement that this is not carved in stone yet, that it needs to be passed by council in order for us to be able to move forward. Now these holds, we'll go through them fairly quickly, but you can see from a perspective, this is the A1 to A9 and A11 and A12. They are being refined through the commenting process. Secondary plan, draft subdivision plan or a site control plan needs to be there. Development agreement with the region for water and sanitary, sewer capacity, and environmental impact studies all have holds. All need to be completed in order for us to be able to proceed and for the developer to move forward in that particular piece. For A10, a little bit different, secondary plan and a noise mitigation report. So that is an industrial piece that it would be rezoned for residential. So in summary, how will these bylaws help? So momentum. We're on that 35-year pace that I mentioned with a 27-year window, with the likelihood, unfortunately, that the way forecasting is done, that the number's going to grow. So that illustration that I showed you on the side of more to a smaller number of starts is we need to get rolling in order to be able to hit the big targets. Some of these parcels are going to contribute to 2031. Some of them are going to contribute to 2051. The big picture comprehensive planning builds better communities. I don't think anybody's going to argue this. Our planning team has wanted to do this forever, and the piecemeal approach, having been forced through an adversarial approach, hasn't just not let it happen. So things like the one road in and the same road back out in Valleywood became a reality. There are things that have happened because of that adversarial decision making, the ability for us to try to move into having a more controlled, more responsive, more forward Caledon approach as opposed to it being done to us is a big motivator for us to define how we want our community to look. Innovation and readiness. As I mentioned, housing starts have slowed. Everybody is kind of stalled. Mortgage rates are high. Even if you wanted to buy something, affordability is nearly impossible right now. We want to be able to be at the forefront when the decision to move forward happens. With this many housing starts across Ontario, with so much focused in the GTA, we want to be able to be there when developers start to move forward and start to put money back into the system to move in a new direction. Better reputation with business. That's twofold. That's with the businesses who are the developers who are trying to work with us. As I said, I don't know why anybody would want to do business with somebody who costs them that much money. The other part of it is, from an economic development perspective, we want to have a great relationship with businesses who want to come here. Great businesses, because people want to live close to where they work. So those reputations are really important. The servicing in transit at scale, to be at the table to say, hey, you need to plan, and we want you planning, and to get on that radar is really important. And the incentive funding. It's not just the provincial incentive funding. The feds do incentive funding as well. And while we did submit recently for federal incentive funding, and we were denied. Informally, we were told that it was a great submission. We went through and had the discussions behind the scenes, peer-to-peer, about what was in the documentation. They said, you hit all the marks. It looks great. In the scoring matrix, there's a big piece for transit. And we don't have transit right now in order to be able to support that. The last slide, the last point I'm going to touch on, is something that came up in the April meeting. So let's talk about the perceived legal conflict with our lead solicitor on the roll. So that's Quentin Annabal. He works for Loopstra Nixon LLP. That's a firm that does municipal land use planning, municipal law, land use planning law, and development law. So the reality of this sector is that the firms in this sector represent municipalities, they represent landowners, developers, and public interest groups. Lawyers must adhere to the Ontario Law Society's rules for professional conduct. They must clear and go through any potential conflict of interest and be able to declare back that there is none. That's with past clients, current, or future. So if they get a new client in the future, they must also disclose that. So Mr. Annabal has disclosed to us that there is no conflict, and that has satisfied the town. What I will tell you is that Loopstra Nixon, their mix of clients, while I don't know the names of their clients because I'm not privy to that, that is private information, they have acted on behalf of more than 60 municipalities, and they have acted for fewer than 20 developers. I'm going to turn it over now to Eric Lusick, who is our Chief Planner and Commissioner of Planning and Economic Development, and he is going to fill you in on some of the details.
Thank you, Janet. Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to take you through some of the planning process that we're proceeding through for the 12 strong mayor bylaws. Just to be clear, so you can see from this first slide, we are following the planning process. You can see how the rezoning fits within this process. Shown on the slide is ultimately what we're following. The goal is improving and expediting Caledon's housing supply. Another goal is about investing in affordable, missing middle, and multi-unit housing, as well as community-related infrastructure to support the expected growth that we're expected to receive. Some context, and very generally, there is a 1-year lag between housing starts and completions for ground-related units and 3 years for apartments, and I mention this because of the time frames we're dealing with. We're looking approximately at 27 years, but you have to think the time that it also takes to build homes. Next slide, please, Lynn. So we're dealing with application areas. So these are the different application areas are the official plan designations that go into this. So you're asking why these areas. So the lands have been identified through the official plan. So we're talking about these 12 areas. They've been identified for growth. They're a logical extension of the current built-up areas within Caledon. In many cases, they provide for the completion of an existing area. They also help identify growth plans that will demonstrate the need for rail service, per Janet's discussion early on, GO Train. Further, some of the areas include existing OLT applications or lands that have been subject to ministerial zoning orders. Next slide, please. On this, there was some discussion from the mayor a little earlier on this one. So this is our draft growth management and phasing plan. So we're still refining this plan, but it effectively identifies the growth that will be proceeding in Caledon and where we intend to put people as the town grows. So many of these lands that we're talking about today are within phase 1, which is really identified as being the time period from now through 2036, whereas the others being in phase 2, and that would be the time period between 2036 and 2051. Some of the early parts of phase 2 may come 20 years or more as well. Sorry, some of the other parts. Next slide, please. So there's been some discussion about, is this new information? Is this brand new? This slide is really up here to demonstrate that there has been some planning that has occurred in parts of these areas. So, and I'll just quickly read them off. We have the South Albion Bolton study. We have the Brez study that was talked about earlier by Janet, including options 1, 2, and 3, Mayfield West, as well as MZO 171/21. So really what this is like it's showing that there's already been some discussion on these land areas. This is really identifying them as we go forward. If we switch to the next slide, here's how each of the 12 areas spell out and the processes by which they've already proceeded through. Now, some of these processes are preliminary or otherwise, and I'm not going to go through and read each one of them out so that we have a little more time. Next slide, please. There was some discussion about our official plan, and Council passed our official plan in March of this year. It's currently sitting with the region for approval. This really identifies things like new community areas, urban centers, primary major transit stations, existing urban areas, as well as potential urban centers. Further, there are designated greenfield areas and designated built-up areas. Unfortunately, the map is very difficult to see from the slides. To give you an idea of some of the growth we're looking at, this slide identifies some of the densities proposed. So some are higher than are required and will be finalized ultimately through secondary planning and subdivision processes. They're best addressed through policy and detailed planning. Noting on here specifically densities for A10 and A12 are notably higher, and this is due to their potential aspect of being major transit study areas, which are strategic locations, A10, as well as conceptual neighborhood center for A12. So specifically, there's a section within the official plan that specifies that population and employment growth will be concentrated in strategic growth areas, including major transit station areas, as I discussed, and locations within existing or planned transit, emphasizing higher order transit. Sure. So what you're seeing on is, across the bottom are the different areas in particular, and the effectively what would be the y-axis would be the density numbers in terms of people. Often it's people and jobs per hectare, but we're speaking specifically today about people. It's typically, yes. Do I have those numbers? Yeah. Yes, per hectare. Sorry, it's really small on my my notes here as well. Let's see what slide we still on. So to give you an idea, some of the Some of the existing areas, just to give you comparatives, Chickadee Lane, we're looking at 83 to 116 people and jobs per hectare. Mayfield West Stage 1 has 68.2. Mayfield West Stage 2 has 77.3. Southfields has 43 and people and jobs per hectare, and Valleywood has 28. These are just some comparatives. Next slide, please. Beyond some of the growth, we're also looking at different types of housing mixes. The housing mix proposed, it's a little different than a lot of what we've already seen in the town of Caledon. Good proportion of the new growth will result in medium densities, and the growth is not just single detached housing. On this slide, you'll see the different areas. If you look from a color perspective, orange is equal to singles and semi-detached, yellow is equal to townhomes, and green is multis or apartment buildings. So there's the varied mix between the different uses or the different types of housing form. Next slide, please. What this slide really wanted to emphasize is the planning that still has to continue occurring. So secondary planning will continue. It'll move forward, and these are the various detailed studies that we go through when we deal with secondary planning. A big part of secondary planning is public engagement. This does not stop today. This continues going forward for each of these areas. Next slide, please. This slide in front of you now shows a map that really identifies the community structure plan for the future Caledon. So it's a schedule within the official plan, and it provides a comprehensive foundation for secondary planning and development in the urban system. The preliminary community structure plan was prepared based on this plan, and town master plan documents to identify the general location of development areas and community defining elements. Next slide, please. Some of the key things that we're talking about as part of the growth here, and some of the positives of growth that you will see, are the community infrastructure that comes with this development. On this slide, you'll see there's 50 neighborhood parks and amenity areas. There's 3 community parks. There's 16 elementary and high schools. And there's 3 fire stations, just as an example. Next slide, please. Details of which will ultimately be decided upon through the secondary planning process. The areas will also see mixed-use land use, which is a fairly new approach for Caledon. Ultimately, the appropriate uses may be defined in terms of form, performance standards, or land use ratios. These guidelines address elements such as building design, facade treatments, signage, landscaping, and outdoor amenities. Next slide. On this slide, what the emphasis is on is there are many tools ultimately used to create complete communities, and a zoning bylaw is not the only one or necessarily the most appropriate tool to create them. The tools that include this are official plan policies, secondary plan policies, tertiary plans, which also include things, if you've heard the term block plans, plans of subdivisions, site plans, townwide design guidelines, community design guidelines, specific urban design briefs, and green development standards that are seen in our active transportation master plan. Next slide, please. Often discussed when we're dealing with development these days is affordability and affordable housing. The affordable housing policy is already in place by virtue of the adopted future Caledon official plan, assuming it's approved by the Region Appeal. Secondary planning and subdivision process, as well as site plan approval in some cases, are the requirements and where you address the matters of affordable housing. And that's something that staff will work on as we move through the secondary planning process or the other planning processes we still have to proceed. Each of the 12 bylaws has provisions added that will permit non-market housing for additional residential units, for multiplexes, as well as broadening the type and range of housing options that will occur in these areas. Next slide, please. Our focus is on attracting investment as well. This is what makes Caledon the place, and it aligns with our vision for growth, both protecting the town's green spaces and natural areas. So a balanced approach to growth is important as it prioritizes employment land as well as residential development. We want to continue promoting our highly educated workforce, the strategic location of our town, and land development opportunities that are key advantages to locating in Caledon. One of the things of note is an estimated 80% of the community's economic growth actually comes from the businesses that are already here. All right. Which slide are you on? Can you jump to 44? Thank you. This is really an index slide to show the different areas we're speaking about. I understand you're not going to be able to make it out. Each of the boards at the back really identify the different land areas. One of the things you'll see is some of the mapping, and Janet brought this up earlier, there's a couple errors, and the reason why we've not corrected is we're going through the process and changes will be coming. So I do encourage you to have a look at the boards once we finish today. Next slide, please. Some of the discussion has been about how will you service these lands. So we've asked the Region Appeal to provide some data that really shows how these lands will be serviced. This map indicates how water infrastructure will be provided through to 2041. So the region is already advancing a number of these initiatives, and ultimately they have a development charges plan that's recently been updated that will really lead to this master planning of water infrastructure. Next slide. In addition to water infrastructure, we're also dealing with wastewater infrastructure. These are two services that the region provides. And again, you can see on the map where the lines are running to. Next slide, please. And one more for me. This one really identifies some of the growth that we would potentially see coming into the Bolton area. So this is the A10 area. And so there was a February 21st public open house for this one, where there was a discussion on the vision and planning alternatives for this particular one. So potential modeling for alternative one is what is being shown in this image. And I'll preface this with this development is really about encouraging transit to come. So encouraging GO Transit to come to Bolton. The official plan permits a minimum of 150 in people and jobs per major transit station areas. So we spoke about a little about density earlier. So in order to understand better what is appropriate, given the permitted heights, some preliminary modeling was completed to really demonstrate this. So the modeling took into account appropriate transitions to built form best practices, as well as densities pushing upwards of 275 units per hectare and 640 people and jobs per hectare. So these are the kind of numbers when you want transit to come, you need them. That concludes my part of the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner of Finance, who will take you from here.
Thank you, Commissioner Lusich. My name is Robert Cummings. I'm the Commissioner of Finance and CFO of the town of Caledon. The first slide I'm showing you is something referred to as development charges. Development charges are fees charged to new development to pay for the increased infrastructure to support the new development, essentially growth paying for growth. And the slide in front of you is showing the town's forecast of units and how that gets to the amount of money coming in for development. And we see with the 17,500 units, it's generating about $1.06 billion in development charges, and that goes to funding the projects for development, for roads, fire protection, library services, and so have you. If you go out to 2041, we see that increases to 2.65 billion. And this is basically how the new development is funded by new developers and new people. Going to the next slide. So with new development comes new homeowners, new businesses, and that essentially is new taxation. And new taxation, because of these plans, goes up to about 145 million a year. If we go out to the 2041, it's almost 200 million a year. So essentially, new growth has paid for the new growth, and that new growth or that new cohort of populace creates the new tax dollars to maintain that new growth into the future and that eventual replacement. That's it.
Thank you. Just a point for a little bit of clarification, the regional official plan, our official plan actually has to be ratified by the province starting on the 1st of July and after, because the planning group from the region is coming to the town. So the province will be responsible for that. And we don't expect the region will be able to complete the work necessary on our official plan before the end of June. So now's the opportunity for questions. Anyone? If you'd like to come to the microphone here and line up with your questions, and we'll get the appropriate expert lined up to respond for you. Mr. Sinclair,
working?
it's on.
Working?
Yes, it is.
Good, thank you. Ian Sinclair. I guess I'm concerned about the physical analysis of how this is all going to be paid for. And the town staff back in February last year put together a very important report on the housing pledge at that time. And they were very explicit, saying to pay for this, it would cost the taxpayers a 20% per year compounded tax increase. I don't know where that observation has gone. I haven't heard it again. I didn't hear it tonight. A few days ago at the Region Appeal, Anthony Parent, the Director of Public Works at the region, told the Regional Council they would need an additional $1 billion a year to pay for infrastructure to meet these deadlines for housing, not just here, but in the entire Region Appeal systems. I didn't hear that tonight. Can we have a really meaningful discussion on how this is going to be paid for, please?
Robert, would you like to come up and help?
Certainly. So, Ontario legislation has the Development Charges Act, which essentially, for lack of a better word, protects the existing taxpayer for any new development coming into the area. So the existing taxpayer does not pay for a new road going to a development. You do not pay for a new fire station servicing that area. That is paid for through new development and new homeowners coming into the area.
I'm aware of that.
Okay, and then maybe I don't understand your question.
I think everyone else is too.
Pardon me?
Everyone else here must be aware of development charges. Most of the legal fights over development charges were developed here in Peel over decades. Bill 23 sacked the development charges. That's where the idea of 20% compounded tax increases came from, to pay for the development.
That's a very good point. Bill 185 has reversed a number of those. So they're no longer being phased in. There's a number of changes coming through for those. Regardless, the development charges are calculated based on the projects required to support the growth. So you do a growth forecast. You look at what your historical service level has been, and that's your cap for development. And that growth forecast determines what you need for infrastructure in a community. If you look at the projects listed in the development charge background study, it adds up to the numbers I provided you in the revenue.
Okay, is that sufficient to pay for everything?
Well, they're an estimate, but yes, that's how the development charges currently works.
All right. I guess throughout this process, there keeps to being adjustments to the information being provided. And I made a fairly long presentation at the public information meeting about this mass zoning proposal, asked a lot of questions. The chair refused to have those answered. When can I have my answers, please?
Sorry, I'm not sure of the question you're asking me right now.
No, you're standing there so someone else can come and replace you.
So you're looking to have a detailed response to each of the questions that you raised in the April meeting?
Yeah,
Is that correct?
I found it quite insulting. I was asking about questions and then not getting an answer, pressing the chair. Well, okay, when are we going to get it? No answer. This is really coming a situation where the town is against us, the residents. You talk about adversarial. So you need to clean that up very quickly. Thank you.
I had a question about slide 51, if we could bring that up, please. Okay, so my understanding is that for a very long time, the town has been trying to increase the percentage of non-residential tax contributors so that the average taxpayer is paying, or the average homeowner who is paying property taxes would pay less. My understanding, I think it's been at this ratio for quite a few years now. I think it's about 20% non-residential, the tax base, and the other 80% is residential. And however, as I said, I think the town's been trying to move that number, that 20%, upward for at least 10, maybe 15 years. I look at those numbers and I see that in 2023, that number's gone down to 15% instead of, down 5% from the 20% that it currently is. And then in 2041, it's dropped further down to 12%. So my question is, are we going in the wrong direction? Are we going in the opposite direction here from what the town has been trying to achieve for many years?
The graph or the table in front of you is in current state. It doesn't take into any considerations of any initiatives to change that ratio going forward. It's just looking at if nothing changed. It's in today's dollars. That's all it is right now. There's more to do there.
So, Mr. Cummings, are you saying that it really is going to go down to 12% by 2041 based on?
I'm saying a status quo right now with nothing else factored into this table. That's where we are.
Okay. Well, it does seem to me we're going in the opposite direction from what I think the town and what probably most residents want.
I understand that. And again, this doesn't factor in any initiatives that may be coming forward that would help that ratio. I appreciate that, though.
Okay.
I do.
Okay, thanks.
And Mr. Cummings, probably it's a question for you as well.
Sure.
Why you did a very, very good job. You did a very, very good job when you presented the information on February 21st, 2023 for the commissioners. And you did a poor job to outline the information here. I mean, you didn't mention about impact of Bill 23 on everything that is going on, like development charges, everything. It has a drastic impact, including us. It actually will increase our taxes that Mr. Ian mentioned. And why this is not outlined anywhere in the presentation. Also, it impacts planning. It impacts greenfields, everything that is about this program that is going on under Bill 23. And you never mentioned it. Why?
The financial analysis we brought is just to support the 12 rezoning areas. That's all it is. It's a compact piece. Talks about how development pays for the development coming forward, and talks about the expected increase in tax revenue with new people, new homeowners and businesses in the area.
but this program goes under Bill 23. And if this is not under Bill 23, it's misleading. It's misleading people, and people think that everything is going to be covered by itself, but it's not. It's outlined in the housing pledge by you. You did a good job outlining it in the housing pledge to the government. Do people worth sharing the same information like you shared to the commissioners, to the government, like your concerns, that it's not going to pay itself? There is a big gap.
It is based on the Development Charges Act put forth through the legislation through Ontario.
Bill
And
23
the
overrides it.
concept is that growth pays for growth. And that's what we're illustrating.
Robert, could you speak to how Bill 185 impacts Bill 23 with respect to some of the DC charges and the financing?
Yeah, a little bit, certainly. So 23 said that there'd be a phasing of the development charges. So you would have to offer a discount in the first year. That discount, let's say it's 20%, 25%, is made up by the taxpayer. So, whereas now, that's been reversed with Bill 185. So that 20% is fully the burden of the developer of the area. So that's one way 185 has worked better. Part two is the timeline that developers have to produce their development charges. It used to have a long period of 18 months. It's being reduced down to 12. That's also helping out the taxpayer. So there's a few things in there like that in 185 that's helped, including the timeline for their actual payment of the development charges at building permit. So these are a number of little things that have helped. And Bill 23 is really not playing the same impact role on the taxpayer, other than saving them money now.
Hi. I'm curious as to whether you're aware, you just talked that you were from Brampton. So you've talked about these beautiful communities. You've come up to Ward 1. Do you realize that this is going to completely decimate the rest of Ward 1? Because this is now going to be the excuse for the aggregate industry to blow the rest of us up. Number one. Number two, my question is, why has our council not voted on the 413 yet? Because we're not for it.
Thank you for that. Just as a point of clarification, I've lived in Brampton in the past. I don't live there now. I live north of Caledon because I've never been able to afford to live in Caledon.
Oh, boy.
With respect to the 413, we're not addressing that today, specific to how council is, whether they're taking a stance or not. The 413 is moving forward, and so we'll deal with that at another point. Next question? Which question is that?
My question is, do you understand that this is going to decimate Ward 1? Do you understand that there's nothing left? People in the Caledon, in Alton Legion,
Would you mind going back to the microphone so it's on the... It's just for the record. So I'll repeat the question just for the record. It's with respect to and please correct me if I get it wrong, is that do we realize that this particular development and the development in the lower part of Caledon will decimate Ward 1 with respect to aggregate, quarries, and all of the like? Is that correct? I'm not certain that it's going to decimate it specifically. The development that's designated at the bottom part of Caledon has been set by the region, which was set by the province. So we have to do it somewhere. So the question is, how are we going to be compensated for it? Because we can't sell our homes now. I don't know whether that's something that we can deal with today, and whether the impact of any type of activity in Ward 1 is specific to this conversation. We can perhaps take that offline with you. Next question.
Regarding zoning bylaws, I have to let everybody know that I'm one of the largest property developers in downtown Alton. I have a property at 1460 Queen Street West. Adjacent to it is a heritage building, all 560 approximately square feet, which I spent fortunes renovating it, restoring it to what it was. I have cost 2 lot line adjustments, $4,700. I've met with Richard Patrick, Mr. Beffert. I've met with the mayor, the councillors, almost everybody, and all of a sudden, an application of PIRC comes along. And so, okay, fine, I'll fill that form in, and now they want to charge me $2,376.74 or something like that to go and have that zoned, which is zoned MU, manufacturing industrial, which means I can have a gas station, pump station, body shop, maybe a body rub place as well to boot. Anyway, this is ridiculous. I've had support from everybody, even to the current mayor has been very sympathetic to it. Everybody has, and all of a sudden, like, obstacles come the way, and there's developers are talking about doing a whole load of damage to the community and everything else, and they can just go wildly charging in, and there's somebody like me and many others who, like me, trying to preserve things which should be preserved, and we have to have obstacles all the way, which I call BBS, bureaucratic bullshit. And that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Jan, I'd like to thank you for changing the structure of the evening to allow for more questions and less talking from staff and politicians.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So my question is with regard to lifting the holds. And the question came up at the end of the last meeting. Is it, how will that vote actually happen? Is it a vote of the full council, or is it a vote which will be subject to the strong mayor's powers, which means that the holds could be lifted by 1/3 of council? So that is my question.
Yes, thank you for that. And we provided you with an answer in Albion. We're verifying that answer with legal, and unfortunately our legal representative is ill today and was not able to come, so I don't have an answer for you on that tonight.
Okay, maybe later. May I be allowed, may I ask one more question? Okay. So this is actually both question and comment. So it's with regard to the conflict of interest for the lawyer Quinto Annabelle. So I personally am not satisfied by his personal declaration that he meets, that he has no conflict of interest. And I'm not quite sure if that's a standard process, because I would have assumed that the ethics commissioner would have vetted him based on professional standards. So I would just like to have that addressed, actually. How is it that he was not properly vetted, that the town accepted his personal statement that he is not in a position of conflict when he's clearly counsel for the town and counsel for some landowners? Now, doesn't necessarily mean there's a conflict, but I'd like to be more assured than just his good word.
Lawyers and legal firms must provide the declaration as a professional service in the same way that any other professional organization and or individual must provide a declaration within their governing body. So there is no separate group that vets or goes through to provide a declaration as per the questioner. It is based on what the individual must do with their governing body. Excellent. No more bending, Al.
No. Okay, thank you. So I hadn't planned on asking this question again this week, Janet, but at the start of the meeting you kind of characterized my question as, do strong mayor powers go away after 2031? Well, that's not really what I asked. What I asked was, I started out by just getting clarification from one of the planning staff who had said that some of these land parcels will have no infrastructure development work started by the end of 2031. So I wasn't talking about housing starts, I was talking about the infrastructure, which, as you pointed out, is the second priority of two priorities of the provinces. The first being 1.5 million homes by 2031. The second priority being building of infrastructure to support the development of those 1.5 million homes. So my point last week, and I want to reiterate it because I think you may have misunderstood it, is that if there are land parcels somewhere in that from A1 to A12 that will have no infrastructure work even started by the end of 2031, my proposition is that they are not subject to strong mayor powers from a rezoning perspective. And last week you said you were going to look into that, and so I'm going to ask again and hope that that's what you do, because I don't think you understood my question based on what you said.
So the strong mayor powers are entrenched in the Municipal Act, so they exist until they're taken away. And the ability, they are linked to the 2031 housing pledge specifically, and in addition to that, the second caveat, which is an addendum to that act, specifies for those special provincial priorities, which is a separate document that specifies for infrastructure, servicing, transit, and one other I can't think off the top of my head because my notes are over there. So those are tied together, but they're separate in the language. So there is no, we have to get an interpretation on the specifics from the province on the 2031 piece and whether the provincial priorities that have been designated will then continue because they are tied to housing starts as well.
Right. But just to reiterate, in the Municipal Act, the province's priorities, there's two, and there's one right after the other. There are 2 dot points. One is the 1.5 million residential units by 2031, and the other is just providing the infrastructure to support those housing developments. So they're part of the same Municipal Act clause. And
yes.
There's no separate clause about that I'm aware of. It's it's right there. So again, one more time, I think if there's no work starting on some of these parcels by the end of 2031 in terms of infrastructure, then I believe that strong mayor powers do not apply to those particular parcels. Okay.
Thank you.
No, it's too tall. Okay, so I have to do, I'm not an official meeting, but just sort of a point of order. I am the one that asked Loopser Nixon the question the night of the public meeting, and the partner who answered the question did not say, as your slide does, and as you characterized it tonight, that they had no conflicts of interest. They said that their conflicts were cleared by the town of Caledon. They did say that they also represent some of the developers here. So what we're saying is that we believe, as residents, that it is a monstrous conflict of interest for the lawyer representing the town of Caledon to also be representing developers, and that is a basic tenet of law. And you might want to check out the article in the Trillium, because that investigative reporter followed up with Loopser Nixon on it. So that's really very different, and I think that's an important point to clarify, and perhaps you can correct your slide for the next meeting and perhaps give us an answer as to why the town feels that it's appropriate for the lawyer representing at least 1, 2, I don't know, developers to also be representing the town of Caledon, because that's the question that we're asking, and we're telling you very clearly that we feel that's a gross conflict of interest. Never seen a court case where the lawyer jumps back and forth between the prosecutor and the defense. Okay, now I work for you. Okay, now I work for you. It's just a basic tenet of the practice of law. So, and they didn't say they had cleared it with the Upper Canada Law Society. He said that he felt that they were in compliance with Upper Canada Law Society rules, which is different. So That's just my point of order and not my question. And then I have a little question about one of your slides, if you could pull it up, which showed the concept of intensification in Bolton, because I was super confused by that slide. If someone could pull it up.
Is it the one near the end?
This one, yes. So
Okay.
I'm trying to understand this. Is that Albion Vaughan along the back? Is that intensification King Road now? Like, what is this diagram supposed to be? Well, that's what I understood, but do you not see the GO train is moved?
It's not moved, it's a stop. It's not moved. It's a stop.
Yeah.
Apologies, I wasn't at the meeting. So there were two concepts apparently. This is one of the ones, and it's really just, it's a demonstration of how development could proceed.
So that's Highway 50 down the middle? Because I'm just confused about where the GO station is. Because I thought the GO station was in Brez option 3, so now it's moved?
No, it's two GO stations.
It's not, it's a stop.
There's-
It's not an
Can't
Okay,
see
I
the
think
image.
staff should answer that question. Thank you. Thank you. Apparently, it was a complicated question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bindu Shah. I'm with the planning department. So this picture doesn't show, to the northwest of this is our Caledon station, that area, which is our planned major transit station area with the dedicated GO that's coming there. This one here that shows that's the location of the second GO station that we are talking about here.
So,
And, I believe the
so it's a
members can add to
stop
that.
on the same line? Is that how you're envisioning it? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you. So I think you said 2041, but it's not in the 30-year Metrolinx plan. So, and now I have my actual question, because that was just a couple of points of clarification. So I keep asking because I still don't understand. I still don't feel that there's justification for doing 12 at once and not having a full process. But I was really shocked at the last meeting when someone asked about the development on Mount Hope, the 4 that are in pre-application that residents don't have any information on at all. You know, we don't have any concept of what's going to go there. That the answer was that there had been conversations with the developer and that developer would be conducting the appropriate studies that are required under the Planning Act. Sorry, it's way too small for me to read those numbers up there. I tell you which one. I think it's A8, I don't know. Yeah, and they're different colors. A8, yes. So that was really shocking to me that we would be even considering zoning something based on conversations with the developer. There is on no kind of planet where this is how development should be taking place. And I am deeply concerned about what kind of legal precedent we're setting for future developers who come to the town of Caledon and then take us to the OLT. If one of the stated reasons is we don't want to waste all this money at the OLT, and they're going to go, hey, you developed these developments over here, you zoned them, and they only had conversations with staff. They didn't have to have pesky PIMs and conduct all those pesky traffic studies and environmental studies and, you know, hydrogeology, architectural. Oh, and by the way, in your list of things that are in holding, at the beginning of this meeting, there wasn't a land acknowledgement. And is this just virtue signaling to do a land acknowledgement? If there's nowhere in this plan to actually do consultation, meaningful consultation with First Nations on any of this,
if I just may, Eric, could you help clarify the process about when developers start conversations with us, how those conversations proceed and how they move towards application and the work that goes into that prior to an application? Or Bindu or Carmen?
I can just start on the consultation piece and maybe you can add on the process. So there was a lot of consultation that happened with our indigenous communities through the official plan review process, which has just ended. These lands, all of them are there was a lot of consultation that happened through the official plan process with our indigenous communities. These lands were part of the discussion through an official plan lens. When the secondary planning will be completed or will be undertaken or is already in the works, additional consultation will happen with the indigenous communities. So that is not something that is going to be skipped over, is what we can say through the process.
However, at that point, it will already be zoned, so you really are consulting after the zoning has happened, and that's not meaningful, authentic consultation.
So
Pete?
I'm not asking any questions. I'm going to make two statements. One is that a lot of this planning is based on 413. And 413 was brought to you by Mr. Ford, and I don't think it'll ever happen. I've been pushing for every protest we've had with a sign saying expropriate 407 and make it part of the highway system with no tolls, and you solve the problem in 1 week. My second statement is another thing brought to you by Doug Ford. I think that I live in a democracy called Canada, where the majority vote wins. He has brought up this thing called strong mayor's powers, which I call mini dictator powers. And the fact that it has been used in Caledon a number of times shocks me.
Hi. You may not know the answer to this question, but earlier this month, Council asked Peel not to download regional roads and waste management on Caledon. And I'm wondering when we will know if those are downloaded. That's my first question.
From what we understand, the report from the transition board is the submission to the province is imminent. So it could be this week. It could be next week. They had indicated that it would be by the end of May. Throughout the process, they have indicated to us that it will not be made public. So we may not know what is submitted until such time that they get close to a decision.
So maybe you could enlighten me on that process. Because if we don't know what's going to happen until it's decided, maybe you can just tell us about that process. Because the fact is that this has a huge bearing on how we go forward on the town.
Yes, it certainly does. And I think that's why council stood unanimously to stand against the downloading for waste and regional roads, because it would contribute to something akin to a 70% tax burden on your taxes. So someone who was paying $8,500 would be close to $15,000. We can't afford it, so council has made it abundantly clear to the province that we don't want it and we cannot afford it. They've made the statement that they will make us whole. So their definition of making us whole is to ensure that the taxpayer will not have to pay. But they haven't shown us any model whatsoever through any part of the process, either publicly or confidentially, to indicate that it's possible. So that's the information that we have right now, and I commend council for taking that step to push that out into the public realm.
I think we all do, but what I'm asking for is some more clarity on the process. So what is it that you know in terms of timelines, and council and staff know?
That's literally the timeline that we know at this point.
So, okay, so to clarify, the transition board is going to report by the end of May, and then we won't know what they report because it won't be public. And then the second part of that is, when will we know? When will Caledon know?
We don't know. What we do know right now is that planning is coming from the Region of Peel to the town effective the 1st of July. That is the one piece that has been made public and is clear and open. That's through Bill 185, but we don't have any of the information that you're asking for.
Okay, and what is your process for finding that out? Like, because this really impacts everything we do. I mean, everything we're talking about tonight might be null and void if we get roads and wastewater.
We continue as staff to work with the transition board and with the other municipalities in trying to find an effective solution, and we keep pushing on behalf of you, the taxpayers.
Okay. Okay, so the second part of my question is, recently Mayor Olivia Chow in Toronto said that Toronto will have a $26 billion infrastructure shortfall in the next 10 years to maintain services. And maybe I did ask Mr. Cummings this at the last meeting on the side, but I just wonder, you know, how we're planning for the maintenance of current infrastructure. I think this infrastructure is a massive piece and affects everything, but I'm just wondering, Mr. Cummings, if you could comment on how we avoid in 20 years being in the place that Toronto is, because we know infrastructure in mature cities costs money to maintain. And what Mayor Chow is saying is that they're not going to be able to start any new infrastructure projects. Obviously, Toronto's a mature city and doesn't have a lot of development charges coming in for new development, but I'm just wondering how we've thought of and what the planning is in place for maintaining all of this new infrastructure that we're building.
Yeah, very good question. So we have a set amount of infrastructure in the current state. Some of it ranks as excellent condition, some of it not so great, and some of it is in need of repair. Annually, we prepare a capital budget for council to make a decision on in terms of what gets done. That capital budget includes numerous different types of maintenance, repairs, and replacement to our current infrastructure to try to keep it whole. That being said, there is an infrastructure gap, and if you look at around page 38 of the budget, you will see the amount of money that we're putting into infrastructure and the amount that we should be putting into infrastructure. So we've been very clear on that going forward. Our asset management plan is due to the province at the end of June. We will be bringing that to council in the upcoming month to show them the revised numbers, given the inflation and additional infrastructure we've taken on. So we are not unlike any municipality in Ontario, having an infrastructure gap in terms of what needs to get done and what they can afford to do. This has been coming for a long time. One of the reasons why we're required to do an asset management plan is because every municipality is in this boat right now with that gap. But Caledon is in an excellent position, comparably, I would say. And I think our focus on it going forward with the asset management plan will help give us some direction in terms of how to take care of it. We work very hard in terms of that capital budget, and so we're trying to balance everything, but we also recognize that there's an affordability piece of it. So yes, we could probably correct it in 2 years, but the tax rate certainly wouldn't be pleasurable to anybody. So we look at how we can run this through incrementally over time to address our replacement needs for our worst infrastructure.
Okay, and then as a follow-up to that, I don't want to take too much time here, but you told me that budgets have to balance. Therefore, you've shown the revenue side of future tax revenues, but you haven't shown the expense side. But I'm wondering in a future meeting if you could show that expense side, because I'd be curious to know, and I'm sure many people are, how those expenses lay out.
Yeah.
You know, what we'll be spending in 2041 on whatever.
Yeah, that's a good question, but there's no way I'm able to prepare a budget for 2041. It shows-
2031.
Or for 2031. It's hard enough to do on a 5-year basis, even a single-year basis. So to show you the expenses, that wasn't the point of that slide. The point of that slide is to show you the additional people moving into the area and the additional tax dollars that raises. That was the only point of it.
And
When people move in, though, as we said with the development charges, there's police stations to maintain, there's roads to maintain, so I don't have the exact numbers.
So if we don't know and we can't forecast this, how do we know that our budget's going to balance?
We make sure, well, it has to balance. We have no choice.
Right.
Part one.
So we raise taxes.
On occasion, yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And thank you. These are great questions. We have 15 minutes left, so still time for questions to come up.
Good evening. My name is John Rutter, and I'm a resident of Terracotta in the wonderful municipality of Caledon. I'm not here to sing my Joni Mitchell song, so everybody can relax there. My comments and questions are directed at Mayor Groves or to Mayor Groves. I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of days ago, and he put a bee in my bonnet in the respect that many residents, including myself, are having a problem digesting this increase of 35,000 homes on top of the 13,000 already pledged homes. Secondly, we're having a problem with digesting the use of super mayor powers for this particular application. And as an outcome of the conversation that I had with this person, I would like to ask Mayor Groves, rather than present all 12 parcels of land under one amendment motion, would it not be possible or feasible or under consideration to present 12 separate motions to a full council? And I honestly believe that if that was done, you would be surprised at the response of some of the councillors, and you might get a 5-4 or 6-3 vote in favor of some of the amended or the proposed amendments. Plus, it would give myself and others an opportunity as residents to consult with our councillors, who at the same time would have a voice at the council meeting where these proposals are presented individually and voted on individually, an opportunity to reflect how the residents actually feel about each individual proposal.
Mayor Groves?
I hope you understand where I'm coming from.
I do, John. Thank you for the question, and that actually is an excellent question. When the bylaws were presented, the bylaws were also presented individually. So they weren't lumped together as one lump sum of 12 properties. They were separated out, so there are 12 bylaws. And staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but through this process, staff will be coming back with reports on each individual property, to your point, separately, because each property has its own merits. And so staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's exactly what will happen, so that they will be voted on individually.
By a full council.
By a full council.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome.
Me again. One thing, we talk about transit, and we're always talking about transit in Bolton. Okay, there's where the mass of people is right now. But everyone seems to forget there was that railway that started off and people could go all the way from Union Station right up to Owen Sound. Why can we not have some people initiate, our politicians, everybody, to sort of get all the traffic off the roads, get people there, work, because you've got Georgetown, it was Cheltenham, Inglewood, it was Alton, of course, and further north, like there's thousands of vehicles could be taken off the road. All these trucks, gravel trucks and everything else, they could have depots along the way, could work off transit hours. I mean, this would cost a mere fraction of this 413. Another just other sort of things which go on. I mean, a vision like me, it just needs a vision. An ordinary person like me and many others, we discuss this, can think this. We need some leadership amongst the politicians and also some accountants. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Ian Sinclair. Mr. Annabelle's letter, I made a count of the permitted uses that he was proposing there, and I counted 84 permitted uses. And my reading of his letter was all 84 uses were going to be approved for each individual 12 development areas. Is that correct?
So each individual bylaw has a range of uses. It's not exact 84 for all, but each individual bylaw is customized to have a range of uses that are proposed based on the plans and studies that have been submitted or the draft plans that have been submitted. There is a variation between the 12.
So how do we know it's not provided on the boards at the back what permitted uses are allocated to each development area?
These are the same schedules that were on the public meeting, statutory public meeting of April, and the bylaws are attached to, but if you like, we can share the bylaws individually with the folks.
Well, Mr. Annabelle's letter has the bylaws drafted in it.
So yes, those bylaws are, as we discussed the process, they are being updated right now. So what was shown on the public meeting is not exactly the status of the bylaws today. But they will be brought forward at the council meeting with full schedules that are updated. These maps are going to be updated, and the text in the bylaws will also be updated.
So really, you need an entirely new public information meeting with all the details.
The process.
The April meeting qualifies as the statutory public meeting, so there is no requirement for a follow-up meeting.
Well, sure, there must be. If you're going to shift the ground and say, well, this is going to change and that's going to change, we don't know what we're commenting on.
So, hi. So the requirement under the Planning Act is if an application or
Closer to the
proposal-
mic, please.
Can you hear me? Okay. If the requirement under the Planning Act is that if an application has gone to a public meeting and there is no substantive change to that application or proposal, there's no requirement for an additional public meeting. That's a requirement. That's a requirement under the Planning Act.
Mm-hmm. No requirement, and there's no prohibition for a second meeting if there's substantial changes.
Correct. There's no prohibition, but there's no requirement. So the statutory public meeting happened on April 25th. If there's substantive changes to the bylaws, then yes, under the Planning Act, we need to go for a second public meeting. But if there's no substantive changes, then a second public meeting is not required.
How will we know there's been substantial changes or not?
We will make that determination as staff.
And how will we know?
You'll be informed of the public meeting, I don't know, I don't know if the clerk's here, but a few days before the when a report goes forward, you will be informed of that meeting.
Well, that would be noon Friday before a Tuesday meeting.
I don't know the timelines, but if that could be correct, yes.
All right. Well, so you're going to pre-zone these 12 parcels of land with a blanket list of zoning. And I don't understand these businesses of development that have interest in these lands are interested in making money as fast as possible. And I don't understand, if you give them all the zoning, why they wouldn't simply automatically saying, well, what's our best for the bottom line right now? And let's forget about how these areas will function as urban areas where people can thrive for the next 200 years. How is this going to work?
Carmen, do you want to take that one, or Bindu?
Sure. So, as some of the slides indicated, each zoning bylaw is a different approach to the conventional zoning bylaw that we have seen in the town till now. It's broad-based, but it is also setting a lot of holes that we know. Secondary planning is required. So at secondary planning stage, the structure of the transportation network, the parks, the location of all these infrastructure facilities is determined. And the rest of, so only those users would be able to go into those areas that will be delineated for these kind of activities. So it is not a broad brush that anybody will be able to build anything anywhere. The secondary plan and the tertiary plan, the plan of subdivision is very, very particular. And when that is approved, you can only build what is being allowed for on those properties. So there are a number of instruments that we will use and tools under the Planning Act to ensure that we create the complete communities that you're talking about.
Okay, I'm still not understanding why we won't get Springdale all over Caledon again.
That is exactly what those tools are meant to protect for and make sure that we get the communities that we want.
Well, I don't
Zoning
think
bylaw
anybody,
is one tool.
You've not made the case at the town why it's good planning practice to pre-zone all of these areas without secondary plans. I'm not getting it.
So I think as Bindu mentioned, so there's still a secondary plan process that we need to go forward with. There's also other processes. There's site plans, there's plans of subdivisions. In order for us to sign off on a plan of subdivision, it needs to conform to the official plan. In order for it to conform to the official plan, secondary planning needs to be done. So without the secondary planning, we cannot approve any subdivisions. That's how we're going to implement those zoning bylaws.
Well, that's okay. You've reiterated process. But I don't understand how you're going to deal with this properly. That's my concern. And I don't think you've made the case at all. I think I've had the mic long enough. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming up on the end of the meeting, so I may have to cut the line if the questions are long. So if you could focus your question, that would be great.
Very short question.
Thank you.
Why are we building such large houses? And that isn't just houses, but semis and townhouses as well.
Could you just repeat that?
Why are we building such large units? Because we talk about number of units, but we also talk about accepting a certain population. So why are we building these ginormous houses? It's 2024.
So these zoning bylaws are allowing or going to be allowing a range of housing options, right? For each of these proposed, we have a housing mix. This is the basic housing mix that is being proposed. Now we'll work with them, and through the secondary planning, tertiary planning, we'll be able to refine that mix. So we'll be able to determine the amount of mixed uses or apartments or other housing options. So it's not just single homes that we are allowing or large homes. We don't know that at the moment. So as soon as we finalize the secondary plan, through a secondary plan, a housing assessment is required. So that study tells us the exact percentage or the split that should happen.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is we now build huge houses. So our singles are huge, our semis are huge, our townhouses are huge. Why are we building huge houses? And Janet, you talked about not being able to afford to live in Caledon. And again, we're not building affordable houses, and we're also not intaking that population in the most sustainable manner. Because again, we're building these ginormous houses. They're single family houses, whether they're a semi or whether they're a townhouse.
So we are, and through our urban design department, we are looking at minimum lot sizes that can be safely kind of accommodate the families that we think will float into Caledon. So we're looking at the minimums. So the lot minimums are where you can influence the size of the lot that can accommodate a house or a row house.
Yes.
So we will be working on those.
And I understand that, but I just think in this area now, in Canada, our culture has shifted. So I grew up in a house that was 1,200 square feet, and I live in a house that's 1,200 square feet. But now we have a cultural shift in Canada where the biggest house is the best house, and we're still fitting 4 people in a house. So I understand that you're going to do those studies, but you're doing it within this new culture of bigger is better. And I'm asking, why are we buying into bigger is better?
I'm not sure any of us have an answer for that. I think that the approach that we're trying to take is to build Caledon the way Caledon wants. So we don't have control over the size of the houses that are up right now, but we are looking at attempting to create a sustainable mix that has some of those smaller sized, more appropriate houses. But appropriate's a judgment statement. And so I wish I had a magic 8-ball or something that would give me a sense of the future that would show that your 1,200 square foot and my 1,400 square foot were the norm. But I can't give you that guarantee.
Well, I would like everybody to keep it in mind, because I think too,
appreciate it.
As we just keep giving it, people keep buying it. So just something to think
appreciate
about.
that. Thanks. And we're going to do the last 2 questions and then call it a night.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone's patience with me. I'm someone that always has a lot of questions. So if we could flip back to the official, that's the exact map I want to see. So we can see the 413 there. It's a really important element in the overall official plan. But the 413 is not a done deal. And politicians come and politicians go, and we are facing a provincial election in 2026, possibly sooner. So if the 413 is not built, what's going to happen to the official plan? Has the planning department have any thoughts or considerations, or do you have a plan B if the 413 is not built?
I think that's a great question, because there is an established urban boundary. So who would like to respond? If you could please tell the crowd your name and your role.
Thank you for the question. So my name is Rita Giulio. I'm the Acting Commissioner of Engineering, Transportation, and Public Works. I can answer your question from the perspective of the 413. I can't answer the question with respect to the rest of the planning elements, but if the 413 doesn't happen, it's really not us that comes up with a solution in terms of the transportation corridor, right? The provinces sort of have to come up with a new solution, and we would have to absorb that solution in our plans. Right now, our transportation master plan does recognize that the 413 is part of that plan and part of that vision. That's what's informed our official plan. You've seen that in the schedules. So if that changes, you're right in that it would have to get absorbed through the plans and the updates of the plans. I turn it over to my planning colleagues to speak to the rest of that. I hope that helped.
So when the regional official plan was being prepared, they did a lot of review about these options and alternative scenarios. The scenario that we have currently in our official plan is based on the region's official plan, which limited our urban boundary to the highway. If the highway were not to proceed, let's say, the focused analysis area that is being studied for the highway will just be added back to our urban boundary. So that is the understanding that we have. We may not need to amend our plans, but again, that is all subject to future discussions with the ministry. But this is the basis of the boundary that we have. And there is an area they call the core area of the highway, and then there's lands around it, which is called the focused analysis area, which is their study area, basically.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. I would just say that a lot of this development, the 413 is the handmaiden to a lot of this development. Now, I am opposed to the 413, but if that plan goes forward without the 413, I cannot imagine what the side roads and concessions are going to look like. It's going to be pretty ugly.
I wanted to speak just quickly about a little bit further on what John from Terracotta mentioned about, why can't we have these 12 applications be addressed individually? And that's, it's really good to hear that there's going to be, the staff will be producing separate reports on each one, but we don't really get to see that. We don't, I guess council will see that, and council will vote based on that under strong mayor powers. However, I'd like to go back to that question of why can't we take that one step further and have public information meetings, including statutory meeting on each of these applications. This is the third meeting I've attended, the third information session that I've attended. Between those meetings, I've studied the slides that the town has on the website, and I find trying to think about any one of these applications or kind of drill down to it to really understand what it is, I find it overwhelming, because there's just, you can't spend time on just one, like there's 11 others that you're trying to look at the same time. It's like drinking from the proverbial fire hose. So I would ask, why can't we just go one step further after those reports are produced by staff to have individual meetings on each of these applications that the public can come to and ask questions and try to understand what these 12 applications truly entail. That's it.
So all of the reports will be made public prior to the time that they would go to council. And we heard, I think it was Carmen, who told us that if there are significant changes to any of the individual bylaws, that a statutory meeting would be required, that staff would make that determination. At this time, we don't know how substantive the changes may be on any of those because we're in the middle of the process.
Understand that, but again, what I'm saying is that it's just overwhelming for I think, any member of the public to try to be able to focus in on each of these, each of these 12 applications when we're only really talking about them en masse at meetings like this.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I have to say that of all of the meetings so far, Ward 1 is the most civil and kind, yet pushing group of people. So appreciate the questions that you have brought forward, and we will see you, we hope, at our next meeting. We'll be having another one in a couple of weeks in Caledon East. Thank you for having us in your community.